you can actually overwrite. But what's so cool and beautiful is you never forget you had the accident, and you never forget the details of it, but you just make it so your nervous system remembers the positive image rather than the negative image, and then there goes your trigger. It's done.
My guest today is Laurel Wiers. She's a seasoned therapist, a coach, and an author. She's dedicated her career to helping individuals conquer trauma and unleash their full potential. Now, initially, she shied away from clients dealing with trauma until she found a new modality rooted in memory reconsolidation. Now, she's a national trainer. She educates fellow clinicians on trauma treatment methodologies. She loves working with athletes, first responders, and high-performing professionals to overcome trauma-induced triggers and find their peak performance. Great day, everyone. I'm Mike Pawlawski, former world champion quarterback, serial entrepreneur, and award-winning TV producer and host. I've lived a life dedicated to mastery through performance and mindset integration. Each week, I'll bring you the insights, strategies, and stories from some of the world's top performers to help you unlock your greatness. Whether you're an athlete aiming for the top or an executive driving your team to victory, this is where you learn how to train your greatness to become an everyday great. Now let's get after it. Well, Laurel, so great to have you on the show. Obviously, big resume, helping a ton of people. I just love having you in today because this is an issue that's so close to my heart. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love having the opportunity to sit down and to share the work I do and to hopefully benefit your listeners.
Well, no doubt they will get a benefit today. Having known you a little bit, has the opportunity to speak with you and understanding what you bring to people, so important. And we'll talk about that coming up. But I have a question for you because I always find it fascinating. People who are healers and helpers like you are often gravitate towards something. And trauma can be difficult. And so many people in the mental health arena, so many people in what we call our healthcare system kind of shy away from it. Were you always drawn to trauma?
Absolutely not. I actually wouldn't see trauma for years and years and years. 17 years to be specific. I ended up pushing trauma out my doors. So what I realized was that graduate school is great for teaching you how to work with couples, anxiety, depression, eating disorders. I could do that all day long. I could do infidelity. Even that, I was kind of self-taught and became a leader in that arena for a while, wrote a book. But trauma, that scared me big time because the minute people said PTSD, I got nervous because I just knew I couldn't help them. And I have always been the type of therapist. I'm super straightforward, very compassionate, but I want to see you get better and get better quick. And so if I know I can't help you, I am not going to sit there and you and ask you, how does that make you feel? And hope that magically you're somehow going to end up better in like 6 weeks. So what I did was I would send everybody to other people I would refer them to, whether it was other practitioners in the community, EMDR therapists. I really didn't even know if they were getting better from the people I sent them to. I just knew that I wasn't going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So no, trauma is definitely not something that I have always wanted to do. But then I was very lucky to have been injured. I know that sounds weird, but it actually opened up the door for me working with trauma. And I had hurt my neck and I was in bed, as most of us do if we injure ourselves. And while I was in bed, I was watching a television show and it had these veterans on. And they were talking about their trauma, which fascinated me. It's like, watching a scary movie, like you want to see it, but you don't. Now it's kind of like, okay, what are they doing? And as they were talking, they shared these forms of therapy that were helping them. And one of the therapies I kept hearing them talk about was called accelerated resolution therapy. And as I listened, what I heard that was so different was they were actually being healed. They were able to do things that they could not do. And it was mostly connected to this new and different type of therapy. So immediately, as I am laying in bed, I signed up for the next class I could find, wherever in the country it was. And I went and I got trained in it. And I had the honor of being trained by actually the developer of the whole therapeutic modality. So nothing like having the person who creates it, teach you how to do it. And,
For sure.
Oh, it was so amazing. And at the moment, I don't think I even really appreciated it for what it was. So anyways, I got trained to that.
I mean, that, not to cut you off, but that's the case, right? Whenever we're in the midst of things, we never appreciate kind of what we have going on.
No. And so she just, taught over this whole weekend how to work with trauma. And by the end of the weekend, I thought one of two things. Either this is the craziest thing I've ever heard of, and I just wasted 3 days and a lot of money, and okay, chalk it up to that, or this is going to be life-changing. And thank goodness it turned out to be the life-changing. So I went back to my office that week, and I had 5 clients already lined up that had come to me with trauma. And I thought, well, okay, just hang tight. Like I might be able to help you. And I started doing this with them. And oh my gosh, everything changed. They literally were walking out of my door 2 hours later, healed and able to face life in a completely different way. And it stuck. So yeah, that's my journey into trauma.
Wow. That's amazing because it is so difficult. Initially, for anybody at home, like to recognize trauma in somebody first and foremost, to see this. Oftentimes people have hangups, people get stuck, people don't understand why they're undertaking these behaviors that they're undertaking. Mm-hmm. And it revolves around some type of trauma in their past. So that's part of it. But B, so many of us have trauma. Some of my listeners at home have heard me talk about it. I grew up with cystic fibrosis. I was suffering from childhood lung disease year after year after year. I was in an oxygen tent, separated from my parents, feeling entirely isolated in that shutdown freeze mode, where this was a huge trauma for me. And on 3 occasions, the doctors told my parents that if he makes it through the night, he'll probably be okay. Right. So it was life-threatening stuff. As a small child, it was trauma. Mm-hmm. And though we didn't think of it that way, back then, trauma was something you run into the ER for. They patch it, right? And they stop the bleeding.
Yes.
But the emotional trauma of it affected me later. It drove me to be a great athlete. It drove me to do the things that I did. But later on in life, when I started having health issues because of the sports, all of a sudden it triggered that trauma in me, and I ended up with severe anxiety. Yeah. And until I found somebody, a healer like you, who could help me out to get me through it, I would literally get stuck at that wall of anxiety where I was doing things that I didn't understand, where I wasn't doing any things. And after being a pro athlete, being a world champion, I couldn't figure out why. What is holding me back? What the hell is going on with me?
Yes.
Right? You start asking those questions. You start ruminating down that hole. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to fix that is amazing. I need to hear more about this. Tell me, like, how does this happen? I just love the fact that's part of why I do this podcast. I want to help people. I want people to understand that. And if anybody at home has had that experience, this is the answer for you here today. And Laurel is fantastic. Having spoken with her on several occasions about this, she is fantastic. So I want to hear more about it. Tell me about the process.
Well, thank you. So it's really interesting because, there's some forms out there of therapy that people know about and others that they don't know about. And so EMDR, right, a lot of people know about that. It's where you move your eyes, it's bilateral stimulation, you revisit the images that are troubling to you, and you process through. It's been very helpful, very effective.
That was, as we discussed, and I told you that helped me.
Yes.
Dr. Sio was my doctor on the West Coast, and the first time I met you, I'm like, oh, Laurel is special. Like she's got that gift, and so I love that. I apologize for interrupting. No. That's how I got there, but I know that your method is different.
Yes, but it's rooted in your method, the method that was used on you, and I love that you can say that. I love that you can speak to, yes, these kind of different, some people call them wacky, they don't quite understand, right? I mean, people think of therapy, they think we go, right? We talk to each other, we work through things. Anytime you say, oh, you're actually going to be a little bit silent and you're going to move your eyes or have someone tap on you or have buzzers in your hand, people get like, all right, now we're into something kind of funky. And then they really...
Now we need the crystals and needles,
yes,
right?
Exactly. And oh, you're going to hypnotize me, so even to make that distinction, like I train all over the world at this point. I train other clinicians how to do these different forms of therapy. And that's one of the things that we come up with a lot. I teach them, you have to be able to tell people how this is not hypnosis. It's different. But anyways, all that to say, so EMDR has been wonderful. But the therapy that I was trained in initially is kind of, I say it's like EMDR on steroids. It's a little bit faster and a little bit quicker and a little more formulaic than EMDR. So in some ways, that's where so much of the appeal is. So when I work with my executives, when I work with my high performers, time is money. And most people think, I can't spend 3 months going to therapy to get through something. And I can say to them, well, we can do like 3 sessions. And the minute they hear 3 sessions, they're like, oh, where do I sign the paperwork for that? So I like it because it's very expedient and it dives right into the trigger and really it extinguishes the triggering piece. Now, the way that works is it's your brain, right? So whether it's EMDR or ART, we're changing the way that your brain and your body communicate about these stuck points or these memories, these things that have happened. So our brain never has a problem with the story. If you say, I was in a car accident, and this is fresh in my mind because I literally just came from 3 hours of a session with somebody today doing this, and it was beautiful and lovely. But if you say you get in a car accident, that's not the problem. The problem is the images that you see from that car accident, that's what keeps you stuck. And that's where your brain just doesn't know what to do with it. It's almost like the woman I worked with this morning, I said, it's like having an automatic car versus a manual transmission. And typically when we go through life, our brain is like an automatic car. It just does what it's supposed to. It takes all these memories, all these events, and it files them back in our brain. Easy peasy, no problem. But when you get something intense, it gets stuck. And it's like, does not compute. It just doesn't know what to do with it. So then what it does is it wants to show you the problem. I almost think about it like a little kid that's like, help me, help me. It's saying, look at this, we need to do something with this. But that's our trigger. And what do? We're like, stop nagging me. And we like just ignore it. We don't pay attention to it. And that's the part that our brain's saying, I need the manual transmission override. I need somebody to help put this back in our brain in a way that makes sense. So that's what I do. I work with the science of reconsolidation, which means that every time that we remember something, we actually store it differently. The way that we remember a story, every time we have to recall it, it actually makes it unstable, meaning it's open for change. So if I can work with you while you're recalling something that's really difficult, and I can calm your nervous system while you're remembering it, I can then change the way that you feel about it and actually change the way that you remember it. And once we kind of like detonate the bomb, get rid of it, and then we can go in and we can actually change the way you see it. You can actually override your brain. So I can have people that have car accidents and the thing that they see is the moment of the impact, or they see themselves flying through the air. And you can make it so that you can calm that memory down. And then you can actually say, now what I want you to do is think about something more pleasant. And as you know, from your experience, you can actually overwrite. But what's so cool and beautiful is you never forget you had the accident. And you never forget the details of it. But you just make it so your nervous system remembers the positive image rather than the negative image. And then there goes your trigger. It's done.
Okay. I told you at home, everybody, that you were going to get something out of that. You just got a master class in the last. If you didn't get that, go back and listen to that again, because that is the explanation right there as I lived it, having gone through this. And I'm just a little into my story.
Yeah.
It's in my book coming out, Everyday Great, and I talk about being 7 years old in the lazy boy chair in my parents' household. And I'm sitting back there. I'm never allowed to sit in that chair because that's Dad's chair, but I'm sick. And so whenever I'm sick, I get carte blanche in the house. And I'm watching Wonder Woman with Linda Carter at the time, right? It was a big hit TV show at the time. And literally she's getting smothered in this cave. And there's lava coming down the walls. She's trapped in there. And I can literally feel the same thing happen in my lungs. And that was the visual that I had, as me sitting there as a kid, as she's going through being smothered by lava. And I'm feeling like I'm being smothered because I can't breathe. And I can see it to this day, picture perfect. And that's what we had to go through. That's what I had to kind of readjust my thinking around. And it's just a fascinating experience. And so it's an amazingly freeing experience once you get there, because that anxiety nagged him 10 years of it, like bad. My trigger was anytime I started feeling sick again, I would revert back to this little kid. So, but I had episodes because of football after that with NSAIDs where I got a bleeding ulcer and almost died and other things. But like every time I had something that felt threatening to me in a illness way, that's how I got to that point.
Absolutely.
Right? That was my trigger. And so how when you get people there, I know I'm delving into this, right? I'm asking you to go down the rabbit's hole with me.
Yeah.
How do you reframe that for them? How do you get them through that point? Because that's such a big key to get to that memory and then switch it. For me, it was feeling safe as that little baby. Yeah, feeling safe at those points in my life that I had to get through.
Exactly.
How do you do that? Because every case is different.
Totally. So there's two ways that I kind of approach things. So it's the first part, which is how do we get in and calm the nervous system? So when people are coming to me, I will typically start with what is the memory, what is the image that's triggering you, right? And go in and deal with that. So whether it's wiping away the abuse, wiping away the car accident, wiping away the injury. We go in and I do the whole protocol I just talked about to work that out. But what I find is the most impactful is what you just talked about. It's going back to that inner child. And it's so hard, Mike, because people say, oh, inner child work, blah, blah, blah. They do. Like, let's just call it for what it is.
So I'm going to say it. Like, I love Dr. Seo, right? She's been a friend of mine since college, since way back when. I appreciate her. I respect her. All of those things. But when she's talking about EMDR, and I'm like, you do what with your, what? Like, no, that's crazy. That's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like that, I don't get that. And so I totally get where you're coming from. People saying, oh, look, crystals and rabbit's feet and, let's break up the chicken bones. Yeah. Like, I get that feeling. And I think it's because our healthcare system has set it up that way. Exactly. If it doesn't come in a pill, it's not legitimate.
Yes. And don't even get me started on that. How many people sometimes get relief and don't need certain things after they heal their trauma, right?
Right. Right.
But yeah, it's that inner child work that has for so long gotten a bad rap. And I don't know if it's because in the past, the way it was worked with, it didn't produce the same results. But truly, there's this other form of therapy that I do now. It's called critical memory integration. And I'm a collaborator on the team that developed it. And what that does is it goes back to what you experienced, which is when we have a trigger, right? It's our body saying, oh no, I don't want to feel that way again. Let's stay away from that and let's make sure we don't ever feel awful. But if you go back and you can feel what someone feels in their body where they're triggered, and it's almost like a thread. So when you say like, how do I do it? I start pulling that thread. And so I start to say, what does that feel familiar to you about? What does that feel familiar? And we keep going. Inevitably, like we end up at some critical memory in someone's life. And then what's so awesome is you can do this work of really listen, like, what was that experience like for you as a child? And then what did that child need? And it's so amazing that where you can start to get to some of those things and you see what you needed, and then you resource yourself in a way and say like, oh, I can give that to myself now. It sounds crazy, but it's like poof. It's gone. It's almost like the woman I worked with this afternoon, I said, honor that, like feel that, like your body needs to take a minute to say like, wow, that was hard. That was rough. Because it's almost like no one's acknowledging it for us or for that child. That child had, like you had to just keep functioning through it till the point you can't. But when you acknowledge it, and I'd love to hear how that happened for you, there's a release, and then your system, it's almost like it goes, oh, now I can rest. Now that you've paid attention to my deepest wound, now we can move on. Let's go play.
See, that is totally it. I talk about this again in my book. And I call it closing the loop, right? As a writer, there's a tool that you use. And as a broadcaster, I use it all the time as well. You open something up, but you leave it out there as a cliffhanger. And so you leave it there so that people stay on edge. They get a little bit of cortisol. They keep that interest up. They keep engaged. They stay involved in in what you want because you want to keep them on board.
Yes.
Well, your nervous system has an open loop. When you have this trauma, there is an open loop that's sitting there for you that you haven't addressed. Our stress response, and again, I'm talking to the expert, but I'm talking to people at home more, is that your amygdala kicks off. It sets off all the stress response, the hormones, the cortisol, the adrenaline, everything gets going through your blood. Osteocalcin now, I think it was Columbia University or Brown University came up with, it's a bone hormone that actually gets involved with it as well.
Wow.
But you get all of this hormone deal going through your body, and you're supposed to process that. You're supposed to say, oh, look, there's the predator. I'm either going to stay here, he's going to go away, or I'm going to run away, or if I have to, I'm going to fight. So one of those things has to happen.
Yes.
And then once it happens, you walk away, you breathe a little bit, and then you celebrate that you survived. And that celebration, the acknowledgement of your safety, is the loop. It's you're closing the loop when you acknowledge that you are safe.
Yes.
But when you get to that freeze point, like I did in the bed as a child, and you can never get out of it, then you are stuck in that loop with no resolution, because there's a possibility you could always end up back there. There's such a fear of it that you froze in that place that it left a mark, an indelible mark. It's like graffiti on the wall of your nervous system.
Yes.
And you can't get it off. And the thing is, you fight it your entire life. The other phrase that I use all the time is, what you fight, you incite. So if you fight anxiety, if you fight fear, you're going to create more of it because you're not solving it, but you're surviving. And so since you're surviving, your body's going to reward you by letting you do more of that. So you create more fear by fighting fear.
Yes.
And you have to actually close that loop. And you have to be able to finish that off in your head to be able to celebrate your safety. To me, that's what I came through. You asked me what my story was. That's how it felt to me. And that's what I write about in my book, is in terms of how to close that loop for people, and then how to perform. Mine goes on to the athleticism, as an athlete, as an executive, how to perform at your peak and how to handle that stuff. But that's what it felt like to me. And it just must be amazing for you to be able to help people with that, because the relief that I got in that moment, and it was literally, and this is why I think having Laurel on is so important. Like, that moment was such a relief. You fight with anxiety for so long, and fear, and it's so uncomfortable because your body's telling you to do something. And all of a sudden you get that release.
Yes. Oh.
And to be there for that so many times must be incredible.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Like, even today, I was driving home. My husband knew it was a highly publicized case in our community too. So he knew, you get a little nervous about these things. Like, I hope, don't fail on me now, Method, And so I'm driving home, and he said, how did it go? And I said, I cried with her. I laughed with her. And I said, I just love seeing people get released into freedom. Her words to me today were, I have hope for the first time in forever. I actually can see that life can go on. And that just never gets old. So I'm very blessed with what I can do. And, I like the piece that you said earlier about, closing the loop, right? That going back to that childhood piece, that's such a big component as far as the integration, right? Because even after you close that loop, you have learned behaviors that you then had to deal with after. And what I find when I work with executives, this is the thing that happens. They'll come to me and they'll say, well, I've worked on this behavior that I have. Like, maybe they get super angry and they feel like somebody's not listening to them, or they're being marginalized or whatnot. And they'll say, try as I might, I have told myself, you're not going to interrupt, you're not going to do this, you're not going to freak out, you're not going to lose it. And what I say to them is, don't be frustrated that you couldn't make that happen by sheer grit and will. Because when it's a response that ties back to the little kid in you, it doesn't care. It doesn't want to listen to logic. It is wired in your body. And we have to pay attention to that and unwire that. But then when you do that, your change in behavior, you no longer have to coach yourself. And I talk about this with this 80-20, 80% of people, you can sit in a room and I can do a workshop and I can talk about trauma and I can talk about these things and say, connect this to this. Where did you learn this behavior? And they can go, oh, that makes sense. That's logical, Laurel. And then they can change their behavior. But 20% of the people, I'm just making those numbers up, the 80-20. But for us,
it's probably pretty close. Yeah.
It's kind of my experience.
Ratio, right?
Yeah. Try as they might, no amount of mentoring, coaching, of talking themselves up, they're going to turn around every time get put in that situation and they're going to blow it. And that's when I say, don't be mad at yourself. That's how you know it's a trigger. That's how we identify. Now let's rewire it. And then when we rewire everything and calm your system down, you don't even have to hype yourself up to go into the meeting. It just doesn't happen anymore. And that's what I tell my clients. They come to me after and they say, so what should I expect now? And I say, you're not going to expect like a new thing to happen. What you're going to see is what doesn't happen anymore. And all of a sudden you're going to walk away, and you probably experienced this. You walk away from a situation that used to make you super anxious or trigger you. And about 5 minutes later you go, oh my gosh, I didn't do that thing. Like I didn't have that feeling in my body. And then that's when I get the text. You're like, oh my gosh, Laurel, I couldn't believe this. Like, this has never happened to me before. And it's so fun because I love the fact that you don't have to do any upkeep and you don't have to remind yourself of it. When you put that to rest, it's over. Like my athletes, they can probably relate to this. So many athletes are injured. And when they get injured, sometimes it doesn't bother you. But every once in a while, you get that one injury and you cannot go back on that court or in that field or do what you need to without having your brain preview the way that you can possibly get harmed right now. And that, to be human, just means that you cannot perform at the same level that you could before that injury if that's running through your head. Your concentration is fragmented, right? Your energy, and you keep doing that over and over again. And you almost lose trust in yourself in a way that you can go out and perform with the same tenacity that you had before the injury. But then I don't even have to do inner child work with stuff like that. Like we can just sit there and I can just calm down the way that their brain remembers the injury. And literally in 45 minutes, I'm not even kidding, gone. They can go back on that field and they're the player they were before the injury happened just by neutralizing that memory. It's so fun.
It's amazing. And I've seen it happen time and time and time again with athletes too. Getting them to reprocess and back to safety is incredible. And it does. Like for me, it would come up. I remember, and I think back to it now, pre-games, when I would stand there in the tunnle and I would start to yawn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my body was trying to get oxygen, but it was also starting to shut down, right? It wanted to like freeze in that moment. That was my parasympathetic nervous system starting to try to shut me down in the moment. And I had to push through that, right? Once I got through the tunnel, I was good to go. Like I had to get through that moment, but I could see that. And that was the freeze. And it would come later in life as my injuries kicked in, as I started feeling bad, I would freeze on more and more things. I would avoid more and more things. I didn't want to be doing stressful things because there was so much stress load on my body from the injuries already. And so it was coming back out in that regard. And so fascinating. I mean, fascinating, the whole process of it and doing all the work in it. I got done, and you said there's no maintenance. Like I am an athlete. So all I know how to do is how to work. And so I still, every morning I'm in the cold tank. Every morning I'm meditating. Every morning I take my walk and I have a gratitude walk and I go reconnect with my father. My father passed away in 2006. And that was, for me, that was a big one too. He was always my buddy, he was my guy. He was my mentor. He was a guy I'd turn to with questions. Sure. So I go on this walk and talk to my dad every single morning, right? And go out there and reconnect with him. And having that connection is huge. And that's a big one. I mean, for your patients, for the people that you deal with, creating that connection again. I felt disconnected. What a difference, what kind of a difference does it make in their lives in terms of being able to connect to people again, which is such a basic human need?
Well, and it all depends, right, on what was the trauma or the incident or the memory that we dealt with, right? Like whether it's infidelity or a loss of a loved one, right? Or just some negative relationship. I find that there's different levels and phases of the integration piece, we'll call it, the aftermath, after we've pulled the trauma, and how many times that someone was traumatized with it, right? So connecting vulnerability is huge. And that's what it comes down to. Do I care to put myself in a position again to hurt the way that I did before? And I always say to people, we always have to make that decision. But wouldn't it be nice to make that decision without having the weight of that trauma basically feeding the decision and saying, no, it's definitely not worth it because you're going to miss out on so much. So, yeah.
It's the gorilla in the room, right?
Yep.
And you don't even, it's there pushing you the whole time. It's keeping you from doing it. Your nervous system is blocking you from moving forward based on that trauma.
Absolutely.
And it's because it's hung up on them, right? It's like having a virus in a computer program. It hits that spot and goes, nope,
Yep.
not going to go past there.
Totally. Yeah.
And that's it. So that's amazing. So what would it look like? So if somebody were to come to you, if they were looking to overcome trauma, what would it look like in their life? You talked a little bit about this, about getting stuck, that 20%. What might it look like? Examples. I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
In their life, when they're facing this, how can they know?
So I say to people, it's the thing that you just keep doing and you walk away from after and you say, I can't believe that happened again, or I can't believe I did that again. That typically means that there's some wiring that's gone on somewhere that has tripped you up. So for example, I worked with someone recently and they were having a very difficult time giving a proposal to another company they had to work for. So it was an executive. And every time they went, it was not just your normal fight or flight, but I'm talking like a major panic fight or flight mode they were in. And so her thing was, through all the years, she just knew like, oh, I hate giving presentations. I hate giving proposals. Like it was like a thing for her. And so I would say, oh, that's rooted in something. And so when you help people identify that, they're like, really? And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure. Like at this point, when I hear people talk, I just hear it all over the place. I'm like, oh, I want to work with you so you don't have to deal with that anymore. And so that's how it would work. I would just say, okay, now that you have this thing that you keep tripping up against or stumbling upon, now I want you to say, where in my body do I feel that when I have that moment that I get tripped up? That's just the magic of it, is the body. And so then I have them sit and say, feel it. And then say, okay, now where do you go now that you're feeling it? And inevitably, we will come up with some type of a memory. And then you can say to them, so now think about this. That memory that you just came up with, does it feel same or different to what you feel every time you have to go give that presentation? And it's so beautiful. People will be like, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. They're like, how did you do that? I never even connected that before. I never even thought about that before. I'll say, no, that's what makes me useful sometimes.
That's what I do. That's why I'm a super genius. Right. I love that. That is fantastic. And it does feel like that. Like, how the hell did you know that?
Seriously.
That's exactly what you're feeling.
Absolutely. Like, even that brings me back to, again, the woman today. While we had this tragedy that we had to deal with that happened to her immediate family member, when I met with her, she kept talking about the phone call that she got. But then somewhere in her conversation, she started talking about her mother and the phone call she got for her mother. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, the mother's actually the trauma point. It actually, while it was a trauma, what happened with her daughter, it was a re-traumatization of what had happened with her mother. And so I knew that the first thing I had to do was heal the trauma from losing her mother. And once that fell, it just made the other piece flow so beautifully, and there was zero resistance at processing that piece of it. So sometimes it's just a matter of being able to listen and understand the connection. That's probably the hardest part for the people that are not clinicians, is understanding how that ties together. But once they sit in my office and we do that, that's our first session. Then our next session is the fun part, which is once I've identified now, when you come to me and said, Laurel, I'm so tired of acting this way or being so angry at my wife. I have someone I'm working with next week and he just has no clue why he's angry with his wife. And I said, oh, I'm sure we're going to figure out why you're so angry with your wife. And it probably has nothing to do with your wife, you know? And so then our next session is, once we've identified the root of it, then that's where I do the work where we pull. I call it a pull. It's a trauma pull. We pull the memory, we change it, we reconsolidate it, we do the work. And then the next session is just kind of a follow-up, which is, how has life been since we did that? And are there any leftovers? But the interesting thing is, when we get to the third session, either life's awesome or it's awesome. And it's so amazing how the body only allows you to hold so much stress at a certain time as well. Once I pull that thing that's been, I call it the filter. I talk to all my clients about this. When something bad happens, it becomes our filter and our whole world comes through that filter. But once we pull it away and we can see clearly, if there's other stuff underneath, the body's like, phew, thank goodness she paid attention to that. We don't have to deal with that anymore. But then the other piece goes, I get my turn now. And so if there's other stuff, it's not uncommon that like maybe a month to 3 months after, if there's more, my clients will call me up and what's so beautiful is, once they've done the work with me once, they know so perfectly, this is one of those things that I have to work with Laurel on. They will call me up and say, all I keep seeing now is this, or all I keep noticing is this. And they're like, I need you to do that thing with me again to clear it out. And so that's what we do, and we clear it out. But yeah, it's that's the way that I typically work with people. And then people can go all over. Sometimes I will do intensives with people, which is they will come in with me and we spend 6 hours together. And I can pull up to 3 to 4 traumas in a day with them. And it's amazing the reset that you get when you can just sit there. It's exhausting. I tell them, people I say to me, oh, I'm a marathon runner, or I work out, like, I'm not going to be tired. And I'm like, oh, you have no idea what this emotional tired is going to feel like. But
Oh,
it's like,
I can tell you that.
right? You're going to sleep so good that night. But they get it done in a day. And to so many people, that is so worth it, because then they go out and they're free, Mike, and they can just go and they can do their thing. So that's kind of how I work. I either do big things or I do, one pull based on what people are going through. Yeah.
I love that. You pull it, and it's like you pull it, blow it off a little bit, buff it up, make it look pretty again, and stick it back in there. That's a great reference. I love that.
Yes.
It's a good metaphor for exactly what you're talking about. And I can personally attest to that emotional tired, right? It's you have this, you're either in avoid or approach, right? You're one of two. And when you're in that fear state, that anxiety state, you're in that avoid, and it's so much work to maintain.
Yes.
And then as soon as that clears, it just releases. But that emotion, it will knock you out. And you talk about people that have it, like there's certain things that correspond with this happening again. With me, major surgeries.
Yes.
I underwent a knee replacement, had a shoulder done, had my neck done. All of those triggered it because I'm back in the hospital doing all those things that I did as a kid. And so those were my triggers. But I didn't put it together in my head. It wasn't like, oh, here's a surgery. Oh, here's anxiety.
Yes.
I actually ended up in the middle after my knee was done, and it would be long. The cortisol would carry me for long enough. And then as soon as the cortisol dropped off is when I would get that anxiety.
Yes.
Right. I would get that and it would kick in. And it was maybe 4 or 5 months after my knee replacement. Then it was a long, painful recovery.
Oh, I'm sure.
Lots of pain meds. And I was literally in the middle of a national convention in a booth and trying to negotiate deals and everything else in the midst of a massive anxiety attack. Wow. Like dealing with all of that at once in that place.
Yeah.
And it was horrible. Right. And so, but it was just a trigger from the surgery. Totally. And so, getting rid of that for anybody at home, anybody who's experiencing, you can hear how giddy I am about this because of the release that it gives you. And what Laurel does is amazing. So I did it with Dr. CO here. Laurel, I mean, just the first time I met her, I knew she was a healer. I could tell, I could feel that from you, and our conversations since, have done nothing but reinforce that opinion. Listening to you talk about it today, I can always tell people, as an athlete, I knew a great coach. When I listened to what they said, they knew exactly what they're talking about, and they hit the keys that you feel. Like if you're feeling this and they hit that point, that's a good coach. Well, as I talk to Laurel, she hits the exact keys that I'm talking about on this front, removing the trauma, getting rid of that anxiety. It's such a big deal. So for people at home, when you're talking to somebody here, you're getting a masterclass, you're getting a lesson in this from somebody who knows their stuff. And I can tell you firsthand. Answer me this, and it's always, as somebody who does this, I know it's hugely gratifying to get the reward, to see the release. But it also has to be taxing on you as you're doing it, because you are dealing with a lot of this emotion and mirror neurons being what they are and the way people interact. And like, it's going to be tough on you too.
I don't know if this is good or bad, how I'll answer this question. It honestly is not that taxing on me. So I think the first couple of years of graduate school, I really had to work my way through, like, how do you handle, right, not holding everybody's stuff. And I had this amazing professor, and he used to say to me, Laurel, when you drive home tonight, all the people you worked with today, you are going to drop off on your way home. And I had an 1.5-hour commute. And so I would open up my door metaphorically, and I would drop everybody off that I drove home. And it was such a good way for me to think about the work that I did, But then, of course, I started out, I was on my own, and I would constantly fret about, did I help someone enough? And it's hard when you're young. I was like 24, I think, when I started being a therapist. Who wants to listen to a 24-year-old? Nobody wants to listen to a 24-year-old for the most part, no matter what letters are behind my name, Mike. And so I had all this pressure on that. But I learned really quickly, maybe within 2 years, that my job is just to be so present with you and to do the best job that I can do when I'm with you. And if I do good there, I'm very good at being present with people, much to my husband's chagrin. Like, I am so hyper-focused on who's with me. Nothing else exists in that moment. And so I learned that when I give my all in that way, that I don't actually have to feel anything later when I leave, because I've done a good job. And if I've done a good job, I can walk away in peace. And so I can sit in that chair some days for 8 or 9 hours, and people think like, oh, I could never do your job. And I think, I don't feel that way at all. And I want people to know that. It does not tax me to do that. The biggest thing that maybe I could say I feel when I do intensives with people, now those are the most tiring. When you spend 6 to 8 hours going through stuff, it's an energy. You feel that energy suck. And because you're so present, those are probably the only days now in my career that at the end, I'm a little more like, oh, that was something.
For sure.
That's where the mirror neurons come in and you're like, wow, that was a lot. But you know what's so cool, Mike? I have to share this. It's actually super spiritual. There are so many times that when you're connected with someone like that, they'll be doing something in their head. And I start to get these like visions almost in my mind, like, oh, I can imagine seeing them like this, or I wonder if they're thinking about this. And they'll pop up and I'll say something to them and they'll be like, how did you know? That is exactly what I was just seeing in my mind's eye. It's this super cool, just united experience when you're that present with somebody. And that, while it's beautiful, that's probably why I'm so tired when I leave at the end of the day.
There's no doubt about it. And I got that from you the first time we met. Your presence and your ability to be there in the conversation, more so than anybody else that was in the room that day. Like, to be in that conversation with somebody, to be fully heard, and like you could feel that interaction, which is amazing. It's got to be amazing for the people that you work with. But yeah, that's one of the things that I miss most about team is the ability to connect on the deepest level, that shared purpose, which is what you have when you're in there with your patients, right? The shared purpose of healing them, of making them better, of helping them to drop off that memory, right? I think it's a great metaphor, for you, but also for them. You're closing the loop. Thank you for coming, but I've had enough of you. You can go home now. Go on about your way, little memory. That'd be great.
Right.
So so that is wonderful. So tell me now, what are you doing with this? I know you wrote the book and you're working with patients and you're keynote speaking and you're working with schools and programs. Tell me everything that you're doing.
So one thing that I've just started doing is working with corporations that I never was so aware of that have trauma on almost a weekly basis. So for example, fast food restaurants, right? Restaurants, trucking companies. Just in the last couple of weeks, this has come up for me. These are people that they have HR, but these people could possibly have, minimum wage workers walking in to a bathroom and someone's overdosed in the middle of this bathroom, right? Or there's a truck driver and there's been an accident and he can't go back to work because he's so traumatized. So right now, I'm really curious about exploring that. How can I be useful to these companies, almost like a critical incident person, right? Call me up, let me go in and help clean up, work with these people that are really so dysregulated that they can't even come back to work, because that's costing the company money, that's costing their employee money, wages and not being there. So that's something that I'm excited to explore right now. So we'll see how that whole piece works out. And the hard part is people don't know someone like me exists, I feel like. They know I exist in the therapy realm, but they don't realize that you can work with me in this arena as well and bring me in. So that's one thing. The second is, yes, I would love to speak to get the message out there on more platforms so that people know the one thing I hear all the time. They say, Laurel, I can't do months of therapy. And I'm like, oh, hallelujah, you don't have to, if you you can work with me and it doesn't have to be that way. So just to get this message out that there are not just the therapy that I do, but other models of therapy that are quick and efficient, and that you do not have to suffer for months and months trying to get healed from some of this stuff. So that's the speaking piece that I'm looking to share. I'm speaking at a couple conferences in the next couple months where I can share with people all these things, so hopefully they can seek out the help that they want. But also executive coaching and one-on-one work. That is the work I really enjoy doing, the part that you can come to me and I can very quickly help you become the version of yourself that you know you are so capable of, or that you were, but something's happened and it's kind of taken the edge off and you just can't seem to get back to where you were. Those are the one-on-one work that I offer to people as well, so that we can move you to the best version of yourself.
That is amazing. And people, if you've listened to anything here today, you have heard how genuine Laurel is, what she can do for you. I could attest to the process. I haven't worked with Laurel directly, but everything that she is saying, I've experienced that stuff going on in my life. It changed everything for me. It changed the way I approached work. It changed the way I approached life. It changed the way my relationships work. It changed everything for me. And so that transformation for you at home can be massive. And somebody like Laurel, having somebody like Laurel in your life to help you through that. If you are a company, think about how much money you can save as a result of this. All the lost revenues for, they talk about bleeding money in a business for things that you don't see, right? The unseen consequences. Those things exist. If you're an executive and you are not performing at the level you thought you should, this is an opportunity for you to pick up your game. And I went through like months of therapy because normal health care was supposed to help it, and it didn't help me at all. Exactly. So instead of going back, I went through 10 years of that intermittent anxiety that I would run into, including extreme anxiety cases.
Yes.
And then literally one day changed everything for me.
Yes,
that's what we're talking about.
I love that you're talking about that, because that is such the truth, Mike. So many people say that. I wish I had known this before I spent 10 years in therapy. So interesting to hear your part of it too, that you're like, yeah, I didn't even want to go back because you probably had lost hope that anything could be helpful. But then you get desperate, right? And someone says, well, go try this wacky woo over there. And you're like, all right, what do I have to lose?
Well, that was it. And I tried it all, right? And the first thing they wanted to do was throw pills at me. Mm-hmm. So I tried that. That was horrible. Yes. That just made everything worse. And then I tried the group therapies and sessions and like all this stuff where we just sat around and did nothing. I just felt like we were churning butter. Yeah. And then I just said, screw it. I'll just, gut it out, bite the bullet, get through it. And that's what I'm going to do. And so I did that for 10 years until finally it just struck me out of the blue one day, perfectly bluebird day, coaching one of my favorite quarterbacks of all time, not a care in the world. And I had massive anxiety. And I'm like, this is just wrong. This has to change. Like, I wasn't sick. There was nothing else going on. And it just struck me. And that's when I called Dr. CEO, who, again, I love Dr. CEO. She's great, and I've known her since we were in college. But it was always this, there's this weird crystally weirdness out there that I could never buy into it because modern medicine has told us that it's not real. Exactly. And it is 100% real. It is 100% functional. So for everybody, all of your patients, I'm just going to thank you for me, because of what you do is amazing. Thank you for being on here. Thank you for bringing this to people. People at home, boy, if you haven't heard of this before, look it up. Where can they find you?
They can go to my website, which is laurelwiers.com. I hang out on LinkedIn pretty good, so they can connect with me there. And also, if people are just wondering if they have triggers and they're not quite sure, they can text the word reset to 33777, and they'll get a short little list that might give them a sense of, maybe this is something I'm struggling with. Maybe I want to look a little bit further into it. And it has my information on that as well. So, but thank you, Mike, for having me. I so appreciate just having this opportunity to talk with you, learn about your story, and to help others.
What a joy having you on. Laurel Wiers, everybody. You learned a ton. I hope that you take something from that. I hope that you go check her out. I hope that you find Laurel on LinkedIn or text one more time. Reset 33777.
Yes.
Right? Reset to 33777. Do it. If you're wondering, do it. It's worth it. It's fantastic release. So great to have you on. Everybody at home, it was a master class today. Take care of your triggers. Find a way to do it. It is life-changing. Until then, I will talk to you next time. I hope you have a great day today and you learn how to live every day great.